Thanks so much for joining me today, Michelle. For those of you who aren't familiar, this is Michelle Hummel. She's been working with EOS for the natural hazard section for the past few years, and is here today to tell us a bit about her role. So do you mind just starting by explaining what EOS is, please, in case people aren't familiar?
Sure, thanks again for having me. So EOS is the science news magazine that's published by AGU. And so if you're an AGU member, you've probably either received EOS in the mail, a print version, or seen articles online or through AGU email updates. But EOS basically covers timely events and also science policy relevant to AGU's focus. And it also solicits and publishes articles written directly by scientists. So those can include updates on ongoing research, as well as broader studies or opinion pieces on trends in the Earth and space sciences. But it is important just to keep in mind that EOS is not a journal, so it does not publish scientific results that have not already been published in peer-reviewed journals. Instead, it's focused on making timely and relevant science more accessible to the worldwide Earth and space science community and also to the science-interested public, with the goal of engaging the public and also building trust in evidence-based science. And all of the EOS articles are available online, and then a selection of articles are chosen each month to include in the print magazine that you might receive in the mail.
So that, I think, brings up a really good point that it's not a journal. And so I was wondering if you talk a little bit about the process to submit, because I know there's science writers on staff and things like that.
Right, so they have a full-time editorial staff at EOS, and so they, if you publish in an AGU journal or something, sometimes they'll reach out to you about featuring your work in EOS, and then the editorial staff will come up with their own articles. But if you, as a scientist, are interested in submitting, there's a form online, and basically you just write a proposal, maybe about 400 words or so, that talks about what the topic is that you're interested in writing about, its relevance to AGU and to the EOS audience, and then the sort of impacts of that work. And then the science advisors, which I'm one of those, we review the proposals and then provide feedback to the editorial board as to whether the topic is interesting and relevant within our field. And then if we find that it is, the editorial board will invite the author to submit a full article.
So can you tell us more about that science advisor role, since you've been doing that for the past while, please?
Sure. So yes, in addition to the editorial board, there is the panel of science advisors. And so these are representatives from each of the AGU sections. And so for the past 2 years, I've been the EOS science advisor for the natural hazards section. And as the science advisor, I help to shape the editorial direction of the publication and ensure that the content is accurately representing the state of the science within the natural hazards field. And so the main tasks are to review those proposals, as I mentioned, provide feedback as to whether the author should be invited to submit a full article. And then I also work with the editorial staff to review the full articles and ensure that they will engage the EOS audience. And then in addition to that, the science advisors also have the chance to propose monthly themes for the printed publication. And so we can then assist the editorial staff in identifying cutting edge and really interesting research that should be featured around each of those themes. And so if you get the print magazine, or if you look online, you can see each month there is an identified theme. It could be about wildfires, or I think one of the upcoming themes is on cores and how scientists use different types of coring methods in their research. So usually it's a broad topic, but we try to identify a couple different angles to explore that within each of the issues.
So you've spoken about the audience a few times, and as AGU members, we all receive copies of in our inboxes or in our mailboxes. But you also mentioned helping the science become more trusted with the public. So I was wondering if you could talk a little about who the target audience actually is and how they might be getting these newsletters, please.
Yeah, so it's sort of I guess, a two-part audience. There is obviously the wider Earth and space science audience, AGU members and other interested scientists. But um, as we're trying to review and write these different articles, the goal is to make them accessible to the public. And so there are several initiatives that EOS has recently implemented, I would say in the past 3 years or so, to try to expand the readership. And one of those is actually translating articles into other languages. So you may have noticed in some of the emails that some articles are now in Spanish, and I think they're also working on translating some to Mandarin and identifying other languages and folks who can do those sorts of translations. And then a second piece of this, EOS also creates some content that is relevant for high school or middle school students and tries to make that available so that teachers, if they want to, they can incorporate content that is appropriate for the level of education that they're teaching, the level of students.
Awesome. So it sounds like there's a lot going on. Can you tell us about a couple projects you've been involved in, please?
Sure. So I think the most exciting for me was last year when we were asked to provide some themes for the upcoming year. I proposed a theme related to equity in hazards and disaster research. And so the editor-in-chief selected that as the theme for the March 2021 issue. So it just came out earlier this spring. And then over the course of a few months, I worked with the editorial staff to identify scientists who are leading efforts to integrate equity considerations into their work on natural hazards. And so the issue that we developed includes a number of different angles, again, on this theme. One of which is an opinion piece on the need to better understand how disasters affect rural populations. And there are also a couple of featured articles on incorporating social vulnerability into existing hazard models and also thinking about how to improve mitigation efforts at the intersection of science and policy. So I think that was a really exciting opportunity to kind of shape the direction of what was going to be featured in that particular issue. And then, just in the day-to-day role of this position, I've been able to review a wide range of articles that span a number of different types of hazards, from floods to wildfires to landslides. And so those articles, a lot of them focus on how we measure and assess the physical hazards themselves, but many also consider approaches for mitigation and adaptation that can help to reduce societal impacts and really improve how we deal with natural hazards. So overall, I really think that the role has been a great way to stay informed about the novel research that's going on within the natural hazards section, and to help to ensure that the information is communicated to the public in an accessible and effective way.
I keep thinking that you must have a very broad background, but I'm wondering if maybe you grew some of that on the job. So I was curious if what your background is and if you can sort of speak to what you've learned and sort of what you were doing beforehand to help you in this role.
Sure. So my background is in civil engineering, and my focus is mainly on coastal hazards, particularly flooding and understanding what the impacts are on communities and infrastructure systems and how we can adapt to, increasingly hazardous coastal situations. And so I definitely think that this was a great learning experience because as an engineer, oftentimes we're really focused on the technical aspects, but really looking at the type of articles that they're looking for within EOS and how to tell a story that is really meaningful and can make a connection with the public who might not really have that disciplinary background, but are obviously impacted by these hazards. I think that's really been a great way to kind of expand my skill set and hopefully will be useful for future communication in terms of this.
Yeah, I was actually wondering how this has changed how you approach your own work and how it has influenced your work. And it sounds like it's still in the process of doing so.
Yeah, I think I've picked up a lot of interesting nuggets of information that have really pushed me to look in new directions, particularly with thinking about how to integrate vulnerability and more equity considerations into my own work as well.
I'm sure that the scientists you've been working with on that special issue appreciate the give and take on both sides of that, actually. And that you've gotten to meet some really interesting people that way.
Yes,
I,
definitely.
So, since you have been working with a lot of science communicators, both on the editorial side and people who are trying to communicate their own science, I was curious if you have any general science communication tips. A lot of the people watching these will be students and early career researchers, so they're still sort of getting into the field and trying to think about how to best communicate with the public.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, I'm not the expert on this necessarily, but I think some of the things that I've learned in this position, one is that it's really important to have a focused message when you're trying to communicate with the public and researchers outside of your field. So, as you're developing your presentation or your article or whatever it happens to be, really taking the time to think about what your main message is and how to do so in a clear and concise way without falling back onto discipline specific jargon is really important, particularly in the hazards field where we're often dealing with really multi and interdisciplinary projects where
Mhm.
we're trying to bridge gaps between different fields. I think being able to have a common vocabulary is really important. And so when you're writing an article or developing a presentation, I think it's helpful once you've created a first draft to kind of step back and think about how each paragraph or each slide that you've created really contributes to your main message. And if you can't draw that clear connection, then maybe think about how to revise that. I found that a lot of the proposals that come in, that's often the one missing piece is just there are some extra pieces that don't necessarily contribute to the main message. And then I would say, secondly, telling a story can be a really effective way of sharing your science and really engaging the public. So in addition to talking about the results of your work, I think you can also consider how to describe how you got there. So what methods did you use? What challenges did you face throughout the research process? Did you have to take a detour that maybe led you to discover something new? I really think that that type of information can help to highlight the human side of the science and really give readers a better idea of what the process looks like. And so some of the most engaging articles that I've reviewed for EOS have used this sort of storytelling approach. And then finally, I would just encourage early career researchers to consider submitting to EOS if they have a chance. So you can submit a summary of your recently published work, or if you're interested in an opinion piece on current trends or gaps in the field, those are always welcome as well. So I know that the editorial board is always looking for new and diverse voices and perspectives to include in the publication. And EOS is a great platform because it does have an international readership. So it's a great way to share your science more broadly.
So you mentioned that they will include stories about recently published research. Is that something where, when you're sort of at the proof stage, you should be reaching out, or is that sort of within 3 months of publication? Is there sort of a time frame implemented, or is it just sort of any recent research?
So there's, I guess, two pathways for that. One is, as I mentioned, if you're publishing in an AGU journal,
Mhm.
the editorial board and journalists there will actively seek out research and kind of, approach you and ask if you're interested in having your research featured. And that's typically written by the editorial board. But if even if no one contacts you and you feel like your research is really interesting and should be shared, then I think at any stage really after your paper is accepted and probably through the embargo period would be fine to reach out, probably even before that if you'd like to put in a proposal, since the process does take a few months to get the proposal approved and then to write the full article.
Okay. So there are a lot of different ways of getting involved. One would be submitting, but you also are nearing the end of your term, I believe. So can you tell us a bit more about how to get involved if this has really sparked your interest more than just submitting a few stories, please?
Sure, yeah. So as I mentioned, I've been doing this for 2 years now, and my term is ending in July. And so I'm looking for someone who's interested in taking over this role with the natural hazards section. And so if you are really enthusiastic about communicating science to the public and helping to shape how the natural hazards section is represented within EOS, then I would encourage you to reach out to me and get in touch. I'm happy to answer any questions, or I can also put you in touch with the editor-in-chief who can provide more details about the position and what it all entails. But I think this is a great way, especially for early career scientists, to get a sense of what's going on in the field, where sort of the leading edge of the natural science research or natural hazards research is, and then to also try to hone your communication skills a little bit and think about what is the best way to communicate science in a practical way for the broader science community and also the public.
So just a couple questions about that before I let you go. The first is I was curious, is a PhD a requirement to be taking over the role from you?
That is a good question and one that I'm not totally sure of. Um,
Okay,
I don't believe it is, but I could definitely check with the editor-in-chief on that.
perfect. And then my other question has to do with about how much time are you committing to this I'll let you define the time frame just so people have an idea of the type of commitment they're taking on.
Yeah, so it's really not too big of a commitment. I would say I maybe get, it varies depending on how many articles people are submitting, but maybe 3 articles per month to review. And typically you have 2 weeks, and these are just proposals. So, it might take an hour or less to review a single proposal. And then if you are helping to kind of develop one of these theme issues, that can take a little bit longer because there are some discussions with the editorial board about what sort of topics to include and who to reach out to. And then I also did a bit of editing and review for those articles as well. But one thing that I didn't mention is that you can also appoint a sort of panel, a review panel to assist you with this. So that really helped me. As I mentioned, my background is in coastal hazards and flooding. And so I engaged folks who have backgrounds in landslides and earthquakes and wildfires as well to sort of provide an additional perspective. So if one of those articles came in, then I could pass them along to people with expertise in that field, and they could do some of the reviews as well. So it's not totally on your shoulders. You can kind of delegate as necessary.
The editorial board has an editorial board.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. Is there anything else, any last tidbits or anything like that you think people should be aware of or you would like to share with us?
No, I think that covers everything. Thanks again for the opportunity, and hopefully everybody keeps reading EOS and finds some interesting articles in there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So if you'd like to get in touch with Michelle and potentially take over her role, you can find her email in the webpage attached, and there'll be an application form. And yeah, it's beginning of June now, so the position's opening soon, and I'm sure Michelle would love to hear from you soon. Thanks so much. Talk to you later.